So hopefully that is showing. There we go. And welcome
Yep.
everyone to the Klaytn SubQuery virtual workshop on data indexing. So yes, as introduced, this is kind of like a lunch and learn, but it could be any other meal break that you're having, jumping in to take a quick fire 25, 30-minute understanding of what SubQuery is. So let me go over to the next slide here. Looking at the agenda, we're going to talk about what the problem is we're trying to solve for. And once we understand that, we then see how SubQuery solves this particular problem, the data indexing problem that I'll be talking about. Then I'll jump in and do a very quick demo, real time and live. And if you are in front of your computers, please do feel free to jump along and follow as well. And then towards the end, we'll have some Q&A. However, if you do have any questions, feel free to either type it into the chat window or pass it through, and we'll make sure we get them answered. All right. So what's the actual problem here? Well, as developers, when you're developing your wonderful decentralized applications, you need to get data, and in particular, blockchain data. So the question is, where and how do you grab hold of this data? Right now, what SubQuery is it's an end-to-end blockchain indexing solution to help developers grab blockchain data. Now, there are three areas within SubQuery, right? We've got what we call the open source data indexer. That's an open source SDK that anyone can go ahead and download and start running really quickly, getting data from the blockchain. And this is what I'll be showing today. Now, once you've got this project up and running, you're going to need to host it somewhere, either at AWS, either Google Cloud, or we've actually got what we call a managed service that you can also deploy at SubQuery as well. And the third piece of the puzzle here you can see is the decentralized network marketplace. So that is a decentralized network where if you are a project, you can actually give the project to something called an indexer. And the indexer can run the project for you, getting the data and then serving it to who? Well, to consumers, people who need the data. They can query for it to power their applications. And then, of course, we've got a third network participant, such as a delegator who can go and support the network. But again, at a very high level, we've got the open source SDK, the managed service, and the decentralized marketplace. Now, a lot of people ask, why SubQuery? Well, as mentioned, it's open source, as you can see here at the top. It's also easy and simple to get up and running. Because we use Docker, you can actually run the project within minutes. And it's very simple because there's generally only 3 files that you'll need to modify. They are the schema, the manifest, and the mappings file. And you won't have to memorize this at the moment because I'm going to repeat this again, and then I'll actually show you this very shortly. A subquery is very customizable because inside the schema file, you can specify the exact data from the blockchain that you need to power your applications. And it's also feature rich because, for example, you can actually scaffold your project using an API file. And an API in the smart contract world stands for an application binary interface, kind of like an API. And this actually defines all the functions inside a smart contract. So if you feed this into SubQuery, it'll practically build 80% of the project for you. Other features include syntax discovery, historical state querying. The list goes on, but I'll stop there. It's also fast, as you can see here, because you're only grabbing the data that you need. Therefore, the project is very lightweight and responsive. It's real time because you can get blockchain data as soon as it appears on the blockchain itself. One of the most powerful features is the fact that it's multi-chain. So what you can do is you can grab data, not just from the Klaytn blockchain, for instance, but from other blockchains, such as within Cosmos, within Polkadot, Near, Algorand, and you can bring all the information together in one project, and then the data goes into a single database with a single API almost like a unified API, so to speak. SubQuery is very flexible, as mentioned, with the different hosting options you've got here. And the last one at the top is that it's compatible with EVM and WASM. And that's important because we know that the EVM space has a very large market share with a lot of projects there as well. So plenty of amazing reasons on why SubQuery. Here's an overview of the supported networks. There's over 110 networks supported. You can see here that Klaytn, the logo is just there. It's a bit hard to read, but you can see that there's quite a few within EVM space, the Polkadot space, Cosmos, and the other ones down below as well. Okay, so let's talk more about Klaytn itself. Now, we've got what we call a starter project inside our GitHub repository. It's called Klaytn Starter. Feel free to scan the QR code here, which will take you directly there. And it's this starter project that I'll be running today to show you how it works. Now, as mentioned, if you do want to join along, you're in front of your computer, there are some prerequisites that you'll need. If you're a developer, you probably already have Node.js already installed, or you can just install it using brew installs node. You'll need a Docker, the fantastic containerized environment here, brew install cast Docker, or just go to the website as well. And the third step here is the actual CLI itself. Now, this one here you probably won't have. So to install this, you'll need to run npm install-g for global at SubQuery CLI. And what I can do is actually, let me just type this into the chat here. Just in case anyone's following, you can copy that out and try to install it. Okay, now for the 3 simple steps to get up and running. Remember the 3 files I mentioned earlier on? Well, the first one is the schema file, and this one defines the shape of the data that you want to index, right? So what kind of information do you want to get from the blockchain to power your application? The second step is you want to configure your endpoints and your filters, and this is done with what's called the manifest file. The manifest file basically tells you the where and the why of the data. Where are you going to get the data from? And the third step in the process is you want to transform your data, aggregate it, etc., with what's called the mappings file. And this is where a lot of the coding takes place. So the 3 files, schema, manifest, and mappings. And again, I'll show you this in VS Code. All right. So for this particular example here, what we're going to do is index all transfers and approval events from the Orbit ETH on the Klaytn Network. Okay, so a couple of QR codes here for you to scan, just as quick links to help make it easier. The code is in GitHub. And then we've also got a documentation website here that takes you step by step as well, going through what we'll do as a reference. All right, so let's go ahead and see it for ourselves. Let me exit the slide deck here. And now you should be seeing VS Code on my screen. So let's go ahead and just close this off. I'll just make it a bit bigger. Okay, so in the command line down below, what I'm going to do, if you're following along, just feel free to jump into your IDE as well, and I'll go SubQL. Let's go version, and you can see I'm running 4.1.0. So the very first thing I want to do is, once I've got the actual CLI installed, let's go SubQL init, right, to initialize a project. And I'm going to give it a name. Let's call it Klaytn demo, Klaytn demo v2, like so. Hit enter. And then what happens is down below, I get an option to choose a network family. And you can see the various options here. I'm going to choose an EVM network, so hit enter. And then you can see all the options here within the EVM network. All right, so I can go down, or I can just type KL, and you'll see Klaytn appear. So let me hit enter. And then I've got the starter project that I can select. And then here, you can see on the left-hand side, the project scaffold has appeared. So I've got a whole bunch of files that is ready for me to use. So I don't have to start from scratch. The RPC endpoint, I can actually type or specify a unique one if I want. However, if I just hit enter, it will accept the parameter in yellow, which is the default, right? And this is the public Klaytn RPC endpoint that we'll be using in today's example. So let me hit enter. And then I've got the author, which I'll leave blank, meaning that it'll set the default of SubQuery team. And then I'll just hit enter. And then what's interesting is I get an option where the project is going to ask if I want to scaffold the project further from an existing contract ABI. And this is really neat because what this allows you to do is if you've got a smart contract address ready, I could paste it in here, and then the project will take all of the functions within the smart contract, the ABI file, and pre-create them for me in my project, which is really handy. I don't have this, I'll be starting from scratch. So let me just select no for now. And there we have it. So I've got the project initialized. The first thing I want to do here is let's CD or change directory into the project here. And I want to run yarn install. This basically just downloads all the dependencies that the project needs. This will take about a minute. So while this is loading, let me go ahead and open the schema file. Now, remember I said that the schema defines the shape of your data, the information you want to grab. Here we've defined two entities or two objects, right? A transfer entity and an approval entity. And you can think of these as actual database tables because it actually translates to a table inside Postgres. The fields such as ID, block height, to, from, value, contract address, this is the information we want to extract, and these are actually the columns inside our database table as well. So this is the schema file here, and again we define it, and then after this, the second step, if you recall, was our manifest file. This is the project.ts file, and if I scroll down, there's a bunch of parameters, some configuration files, but the most important part really is one here, the endpoint. This one is Klaytn. And note that this is an array, so I could actually provide multiple endpoints. And the neat thing about it is if one endpoint is down, then the project will flick to the second or the next endpoint. Scrolling down it further, I've got my data sources. So I've got something called a start block. So you can actually specify where you want to start indexing from. If this was 1, it'll be the very first Genesis block. At the moment, we've got a block. Let me read here. I think that's 131 million, if I'm not mistaken, from that block. Scrolling down, I've got some handlers and also filters as well. So these handlers, these are essentially functions that will get triggered when the filter condition is met. So the project scanning the blockchain, when it sees a function of approve, it will then trigger this handler function. You might be asking, what does this function look like? Well, this is step 3 in the process, where if I go to sources, mappings, open up the mapping handler, you'll see that I've got the TypeScript code where I've got the handle log function, And then I've also got the handle transaction function as well. And you can see that this maps one-to-one. Over here, I've got transaction, transaction, and then down here, I've got, up above, I'll have log somewhere. Oh, here we go, down below. I've got a log here. So inside the log file, all these functions, you can see I can go ahead and log some information to the command line for debugging purposes. And then I go ahead and construct an object, and then I grab the block height, the to address, the from address from the log argument, which was passed in as a parameter to my function. So you can see here it's log.args.to, .from, etc. And if I go down to my handle transaction function, you can see very similar manner here. I'm logging information to the console, and this time my argument is tx, and then I extract the transaction hash, the transaction from address, the spender, the value, etc. out of the blockchain into the approval object, and then I save it, essentially saving it to the database. So those were the three files, and you'll notice now that the dependencies have been installed. So after this, I want to run a command called yarn code gen. Whoops, let me just make this bigger. This effectively generates the TypeScripts for me. And then after this, all I want to do is build the code. So go yarn build. Okay, so what I could do as a shortcut is if I go to my package.json file, what I could do is just run yarn dev, because what this does is it's a shortcut, as you can see up here, for code-gen, for SubQuery build, and also Docker Compose pull as well. However, I've just done it the long way just to show you. So it's yarn code gen, we've done build, and now I'm going to go start Docker, which is effectively this shortcut command up top, where it'll pull the images and then start Docker. So let's hit that. And then I've got Docker running in the background here. And very shortly, you should see I've got Klaytn demo v2. And then I've got the Postgres image being downloaded and started up. I've got my node image and also the GraphQL engine as well. So let's give this a few minutes. And then the last step is let's go ahead and jump into the README file on the left-hand side here. And what I'm going to do is copy out the sample GraphQL query, because this is what I'm going to do to query for the data. And then in my browser, I can go to localhost 3000, and then I can paste the query in, hit run, and you can see I've got data coming back already. There we go. And that's really good news. Now, you might be wondering, how do we cross-check this data? Is it correct? Well, what we can do is let's copy out the ID, this ID here, and then let's go to Klaytn Scope, which is the Klaytn Blockchain Explorer, and I'm going to paste the transaction ID here. Let's do a search, and this is the particular transaction. Right, now let's go and take a look at the event logs, and I'll go back and select. Let's look for this particular value here, ending in 307. So I'm looking for 18135, etc. Let's copy this. I'll do a paste. And there we have it. We've got this particular event here, this transfer event that has been picked up by the SubQuery project. So let me just put it side by side here. If we compare, say, the to address, it ends in D19D. You can see it's D19D here as well. So this is a particular payload that has been indexed in our SubQuery project that we saw, that we got up and running in a couple of minutes. Okay, so let me just stop here. That was the demo, and anyone can download this and run it just to get a sense of how it works as well. All right, let me jump back to the slides here. Okay, so here's a screenshot of the example that we ran and the results. Comparing them side by side, you can see the data is indeed accurate. So let's go through a quick summary here. We had a quick look at what is SubQuery, what problem does it solve, and what are the benefits of SubQuery as well. We took a look at the 3 simple steps to create a project, which was to define the 3 files. We saw the schema file, the manifest file, and then the mappings file too. And then you saw a quick demo of the project indexing all the transfers and approval events from the Orbit Ethereum bridge on the Klaytn Network. And for any developers out there, if you do have an interesting project that you'd like to collaborate on, would love to work with you on this to provide more use cases and help developers build practical applications. Now, just a note that the decentralization and tokenization of our network is the next big leap for SubQuery, where we're completely decentralizing the application stack and hopefully yours as well. And we want to incentivize your community to run the infrastructure too, as indexes, as mentioned, and our SubQuery network Kepler is live. Feel free to scan the QR code, do a Google search, and check out how it works. And we'd love to have you on board as well. If you do need more information, feel free to check out our tech documentation. It's at academy.subquery.network. And if you want to reach out, feel free to give me a shout on Telegram. I'm available in many different channels and some links there, subquery.network, our address for the website here. We've got a Discord community, etc. So don't be shy. Feel free to reach out. And there we have it. So thank you once again very much for your time. Happy to open up the lines for any questions that anyone may have.